At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI garbage. And what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it that way. I'm Daniel Pierce, and I'm going to be your narrator. Now, let's get into today's story. Nico DuBois entered Xenobotany Lab 4, and the other students shifted away. The lab's scrubbed air tasted of ozone and antiseptic, a sterile void that left a chemical residue on his tongue. Only the hushed hum of containment fields and the rustle of full-body environmental suits broke the silence. His classmates, a varied collection of beings from across the galactic concord, moved with deliberate steps inside their bulky suits, their faces obscured behind polarized visors. He wore a simple gray jumpsuit, the standard Lyceum student uniform. The suit was comfortable and breathable, leaving his hands free. He ambled over to his designated station and nodded slightly to the guest student at the next station. Sensitive, quivering filaments surrounded the slender being's single, vast eye, a pool of liquid darkness. She ruffled the fine, downy feathers on her neck and shuffled a few centimeters away. Nico sighed. First day of Red Zone Flora. Analysis and avoidance. At the amphitheater-style lab's front, behind a reinforced energy screen that warped the air like heat haze, stood Professor Orzo. The professor was an Ophian, his body a suspended intricate construct of interlocking metallic rings that hummed with a deep frequency. The delicate melodic chimes that accompanied his every movement were his voice and his senses. The harmonies were a form of subconscious echolocation he used to perceive the room. A specimen commanded the lab center. Encased in a high-containment terrarium of triple-pane transparent steel, under a lamp that mimicked the radiation of a G-type star, sat a single vibrant plant. Its leaves were a deep green, its stem sturdy. From its branches hung several crimson orbs, round and glossy. A tomato plant. "Welcome," Professor Orzo chimed, the universal translator rendering the resonant tones into crisp Concordian standard, "to what is, statistically, the most dangerous classroom on the Lyceum of Gaul campus." A nervous rustle passed through the suited students. Orzo gestured with one of his smaller orbiting rings towards Nico. His chime sharpened and all the students turned to look. "For those of you noting Mr. DuBois' attire, the university has acknowledged his biology. His species coevolution with red zone flora provides a resistance that renders the usual precautions redundant. This resistance provides a potent lesson in coevolutionary symbiosis." Nico managed a weak, tight-lipped smile. He was less a student and more a live-action textbook illustration titled Figure 1-1 Deathworlder exhibiting anomalous resilience. The other students stared, their postures stiff, as if he were an unexploded bomb. Professor Orzo turned his attention to the terrarium. The resonant harmony of his body remained a steady academic hum. "Before you is a specimen from the genus Solanum, specifically Solanum lycopersicum, from the planet designated Terra, or, as its inhabitants call it, Earth." The name echoed in the quiet lab. Earth, Red Zone, the highest hazard rating, a classification of planets where the ground itself was hostile. "This plant," Orzo continued, his chimes resonated, "is beautiful and lethal. Like most members of its family, its leaves, stem, and roots saturate themselves with a potent glycoalkaloid neurotoxin known as tomatine. Ingestion can lead to severe gastrointestinal distress, hallucinations, paralysis, and, in sufficient quantities, cessation of all vital functions." Several students scribbled notes. Nico kept his expression neutral. His grandmother's sun-drenched kitchen in Georgia bloomed in his memory. The sharp green scent of tomato vines in her hands filled his senses as she sliced up under-ripe fruit, dredged them in cornmeal and flour, and slid them into a skillet of sizzling bacon fat, fried green tomatoes. Lethal and beautiful indeed. The fruit, Orzel said, indicating the ripe red tomatoes. Biologists consider the least toxic part a clever trick to encourage seed dispersal. However, it contains trace amounts of poison, and its high acidity can be corrosive to its digestive tracts of most known species. Nico's mind drifted to a bubbling pot of marinara sauce, the rich, sweet, acidic tang filling the air. He pictured fresh bruschetta of sun-dried tomatoes packed in oil and herbs, of a tomato sandwich with mayonnaise and black pepper on white bread. He pressed his lips together to keep from smiling. The lecture detailed the plant's defense mechanisms with a dispassionate fascination of a scholar dissecting a weapon. The students recorded every word, their remote styluses scratching against data tablets. Through it all, Nico remained still, his relaxed posture a stark contrast to the professor's dire warnings. The other students watched him. To them, he was a living specimen, an escape from the very terrarium they all feared, and his nonchalance was just more proof of his alien, dangerous nature. For your first practical exercise, Professor Orzel chimed in the next session, you will work in pairs to perform a cellular analysis of another member of the Solanum family, Solanum tubersum. Automated drones brought a new terrarium forward. Inside, a potato plant nestled in dark, rich soil. A corner of Nico's mouth twitched. Your objective is to use the lab's remote manipulators to excise a sample from the tuber, the starchy storage organ, and analyze its cellular structure while maintaining primary containment. I will base your grade on your accuracy, safety, and the thoroughness of your report. I have assigned the pairings for optimal interspecies collaboration. Mr. DuBois, you will be working with Mrs. Shiala of the Spun Filaments. Nico looked toward his station partner, the Kess from the first day. Shiala's form was a marvel of biological engineering, her two-legged frame covered in fine, downy feathers that shifted in the air currents. She clasped her four smaller upper manipulators designed for delicate work tightly before her. Her single, vast, dark eye was fixed on him, and she shrank back as he approached. Pleasure to be working with you, Shiala, Nico said, his voice calm. Shiala's vocal cords, located near her throat, produced a series of rapid, nervous trills. Likewise, Mr. DuBois, she whispered. They turned to the control console. A holographic display projected a magnified view of the terrarium, with an overlay of schematics and control interfaces for the robotic arms inside. I can take the lead on the manipulators if you wish, Shiala offered, her upper limbs hovering over the controls. Sounds good to me, Nico said, leaning back to give her space. You're the expert here. He meant it as a compliment, a way to put her at ease, but she seemed to take it as a confirmation of her own fragility versus his Deathworlder competence. Her trills intensified. Shiala operated the remote manipulators at an agonizing pace. She planned each movement, reviewed it, and executed it in fractions of a millimeter. The robotic arm crept towards the potato plant, its metallic claws opening over several seconds. After several minutes, the arm had progressed just halfway to the plant. You know, Nico said, you can ignore the leaves. The toxin concentrates mostly in the green parts. The tuber itself is safe. Shiala froze, her manipulators hovering over the controls. The professor said the entire organism is a potential biohazard. Yeah, well, he also called a tomato a beautiful lethal plant, Nico muttered. Raising his voice, he said, technically, yeah. But my people have been eating these for thousands of years. We've figured out which parts to cook. You can just go straight for the dirt. Shiala stared at him, her huge dark eye unblinking. The idea of ignoring a stated safety protocol seemed to stall her thoughts, but the living, breathing human sitting next to her was a powerful counter-argument. Hesitantly, she adjusted the manipulator's trajectory, bypassing the leafy greens and aiming directly for the base of the stem. With Nico's guidance, a little to the left, now dig down, you'll feel it when you hit one. She managed to unearth a small, lumpy tuber. Excising the sample took another long interval of careful sawing and lifting. By the time they placed the tiny sliver of potato into the automated analysis port, The process seemed to have aged Nico a year. The analysis drone whirred, its scanners bathing the sample in light. Data scrolled across the shared screen. High starch content, complex carbohydrates, trace minerals. Analysis complete. Shiala breathed, slumping. Containment secure. See? Told you, Nico said with a grin. Makes you hungry, right? He was joking, but Shiala flinched, as if he had suggested they lick the containment field. She looked from the data screen to the potato in the terrarium, to him. Her throat produced a slow, thoughtful series of trills this time. Thank you for your assistance, Mr. Du Bois, she said, her tone formal but laced with curiosity. Your elemental knowledge was invaluable. Call me Nico, he said, and it's common sense. It's just a weeknight dinner. The idiom slid past her comprehension, but she nodded, still studying him with her liquid eyes as if he were the most complex specimen in the lab. The dorm unit assigned to Nico was a seamless cube of pale gray material, with a bed that folded into the wall, a desk that materialized from the floor, and a personal hygiene station that did its work with sonic vibrations and a fine nutrient mist. The whole space was clean, practical, and sterile. The worst part was the ration dispenser. A small panel on the wall produced a calibrated species-appropriate ration slurry. Nico's was a beige slurry that tasted vaguely of oatmeal and vitamins. The slurry provided every micronutrient a human male of his age and build required for optimal function. Tonight, he missed the humidity of Georgia's summer. He missed the sound of cicadas. He missed the smell of his grandmother's kitchen. He looked at the ration dispenser. I'm done with this, he said to the empty room. From a hidden compartment in his transport trunk, he pulled out his contraband, an electric skillet, a small cutting board, a chef's knife, its worn wooden handle smooth in his palm, and the most precious cargo, a sealed case containing an arsenal of spices, dried herbs, 2 fat heads of garlic, and a handful of yellow onions. Space station regulations on particulate emissions were strict. Unauthorized cooking was grounds for immediate expulsion. But Nico was a culinary student, and life without flavor was a hollow existence. He had come prepared. He pulled a small, high-efficiency carbon filter from his bag and attached it to the room's primary air vent. It would catch most of the scent. He set the skillet to heat and drizzled a little oil he'd justified as a biological skin emollient onto its surface. He peeled an onion, the layers coming away with a satisfying crinkle. He sliced it thin, his knife tapping a steady rhythm against the board. Then he smashed a clove of garlic with the blade's flat side, releasing its sharp aroma. He slid the onions and garlic into the hot oil. The hiss and sizzle filled the quiet room. Soon, a complex aroma, rich and savory, filled the small space. The smell of allium compounds breaking down and caramelizing. The smell of 1,000 meals, the foundational scent of home. Amidst the lyceum scentless environment, the scent was a fragrant declaration. The filter would miss some of it. A little would leak into the corridor. As he stirred the softening vegetables, he imagined the scent wafting down the hallway. He pictured a passing growlock, its sensitive olfactory tendrils twitching, a translucent plorphin, its inner organs shifting in a slow drift, would pause. The image made him smile. Let them wonder. Anything was better than ration slurry. Professor Orzal stood before the class, his metallic form emitting a focused academic hum. A massive rotating hologram of a molecule, a complex structure of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen, floated in the room's center. Today, Orzal chimed, his tones echoing in a lecture hall, we will discuss among the most elegant and brutal forms of botanical chemical defense, the capsaicinoids. Nico leaned forward in his seat. This molecule, the professor continued, indicating the hologram, is capsaicin. It is the primary active component in the genus Capsicum, another Terran plant family. Where the Solanum family employs direct neurotoxins, capsaicin employs a more insidious mechanism. It subverts nerve cells. He magnified a section of the molecule. This vanilloid group here binds directly to a specific type of transient receptor potential channel in the cell membranes of pain and heat-sensing neurons. The TRPV1 receptor, to be specific. In most species, this receptor's function is to detect high temperatures to warn the body of literal fire. Orzal stopped, letting the information settle. The room was silent, save for the hum of the lab equipment. Capsaicin binding to this receptor, Orzal stated, his chimes deepening into a more severe chord, causes the channel to open. This triggers a massive influx of calcium ions, which the neuron interprets as a genuine thermal event of extreme intensity. In layman's terms, it convinces the brain that the affected tissue is on fire. It simulates burning while preserving the tissue's integrity. Few students shifted in their environmental suits. Shiala, seated 2 stations down from Nico, recoiled, her downy feathers puffing out in alarm. "It is," Orzal declared, "among the most efficient deterrents in any known ecosystem. A brilliant evolutionary strategy to prevent mammals from consuming its fruit, while allowing avian species who are immune to the effect to consume them and disperse the seeds. A masterpiece of targeted chemical warfare." Nico sat back and smiled. He thought of the smoky chipotles, of fruity habaneros, of the sharp heat of a serrano pepper. He remembered the first time his uncle had dared him to eat a whole jalapeno, the searing wave of heat followed by the giddy rush of endorphins. He recalled the complex layered warmth of a good bowl of Texas chili, a heat that bloomed at the back of your throat and settled into a comforting glow in your belly. A masterpiece of targeted chemical warfare indeed. Delicious.
Hey. Sorry to interrupt your story and fall out of wherever I fell out of. But, I just want to say really quick that I really do like this story, and I would love it even more. Hey, I know you. Yeah, you've been here before. Well, anyway, thanks for coming in again. But I would love it even more if you like this video and let them know about it. Because every time a video gets a like, a squirrel gets its nuts. Okay, I gotta go. Bye.
Professor Orzal dismissed them for their mid-session break, a mandated period of rest and nutritional intake. The students filed out of the main lab into the adjoining sterile observation lounge, a stark white room furnished with molded benches and ration dispensers. A thick, floor-to-ceiling pane of transparent steel separated them from the lab, where Orzal remained at his podium reviewing data. The lounge filled with hushed conversation. "Can you imagine your own nerves betraying you like that?" A slender, multi-jointed being hissed to its neighbor. "A living fire. It's barbaric." A Petron with skin like polished granite rasped its dense form unmoving. Nico found an empty spot on a bench and unwrapped his lunch. The refractory smoked turkey analog and bread were bland but edible. The sandwich needed something. He reached into his pack and pulled out a small glass bottle filled with vibrant orange-red fluid. The label, which he had printed himself, read, "Grandma Du Bois Habanero Surprise. A little piece of home." Beside him, frantic trills followed a sharp intake of breath. He glanced over. Shiala. She had chosen a spot a few meters away, but now she was scrambling backward, her large eye fixed on the bottle in his hand, as if he had just armed a grenade. Her movement drew stares. Across the room, students turned. The conversation died. Even Professor Orzal, visible through the transparent steel, looked up from his console. The calm harmony of his chimes stuttered into a dissonant, questioning chord. With calm deliberation, Nico uncapped the bottle. He tilted over his sandwich and shook it, letting a generous amount of sauce splatter across the turkey. The sharp, fruity scent of habanero peppers cut through the lounge's neutral atmosphere. Collective gasp went through the room. Several students physically recoiled. A voice, amplified and sharp, chimed through the lounge's comm system. Professor Orzal. "Mr. Du Bois," the professor rang out, his tone strained and discordant. What are you doing with that concentrated chemical weapon? Every being in the room stared at him. The room was so quiet, he could hear the ventilation. Nico paused, the sandwich halfway to his mouth. He looked down at the bottle of hot sauce, then up towards the viewport where Professor Orzol stood, his metallic rings vibrating with agitated disharmony. He took a slow, deliberate bite of his sandwich. He chewed thoughtfully, savoring the initial sweetness of the peppers, the smoky flavor of the turkey, and the slow-building burn that spread across his tongue. He swallowed. Then, looking directly at the viewport, he held up the bottle for emphasis. "Professor," he said, his voice clear in the silent room, "we put this on our food for flavor." The lounge remained silent. Only the faint, chaotic chiming of Professor Orzol's form broke the silence as his tones struggled to find a coherent chord. The students all spoke at once, a cacophony of trills, whistles, and translated Concordian. "Why? Is it a ritual of self-flagellation? The sensation is pleasurable to you." "Is this a dominus display? Are you threatening us?" Nico held up his hands. "Oh, everybody calm down. It's for flavor, a seasoning." The word seemed to confuse them. He tried to explain. He talked about endorphins, the body's natural painkillers that flooded the brain in response to capsaicin, creating a mild euphoria. He tried to describe the concept of an acquired taste, of training your palate to appreciate complex sensations. He explained that the heat was beside the point. The peppers themselves had distinct flavors, fruity, smoky, earthy. The task felt like trying to describe color to someone born blind. They looked at him as if he were a member of some bizarre pain cult. After class, he was packing his tablet. Shyala approached his station. She kept a respectable distance, the feathers on her manipulators ruffling against each other. "Mr. Du Bois, Nico," she said, her voice a whisper. Her throat trilled. "Your condiment, the chemical composition must be fascinating." "You can call it hot sauce," Nico said with a gentle smile. "Hot sauce," she repeated the words. "My studies are in organic chemistry. The way you describe the interaction with the TRPV1 receptors, it is a subject of great interest to me." She paused, then continued. "I was wondering if, under strictly controlled laboratory conditions, of course, if I might analyze a sample." Nico understood. She wanted more than a gas chromatograph reading. She wanted to smell it. Her curiosity was winning over her caution. He unscrewed the cap of the bottle he kept in his pack. "Here," he said, holding it out. "Just waft it." He demonstrated, waving his hand over the opening to bring the aroma towards him. Shyala mimicked the gesture with one of her delicate upper manipulators. She leaned in, the filaments around her large eye quivering. She took a tentative sniff. Her whole body jolted. All the downy feathers in her body stood on end. She stumbled back, her throat letting out a series of sharp trills like a Geiger counter near a reactor leak. "It is pungent," she managed, her voice a strange mix of sensory overload and intrigue. "The volatile compounds are overwhelming, and yet there is a distinct note of, what is this, fructus?" "Fruit," Nico corrected, smiling. "Habaneros are a type of fruit." Shyala stared at him, then back at the bottle, then at the half-eaten sandwich still sitting in its wrapper on his desk. Gears turned behind her beautiful liquid eye. "Fascinating," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "Utterly, terrifyingly fascinating." "Are you certain this is safe?" Shyala asked. She stood just inside Nico's doorway, poised for a rapid escape, as if entering a dragon's den. "Perfectly safe," Nico assured her, gesturing to a stool he had pulled up to his desk. "Welcome to my highly illegal, unsanctioned kitchen. The menu for tonight's controlled culinary experiment is roasted root vegetables." He had procured some local Galian tubers from a botanical supply depot. They were a pale purple color and looked vaguely like sweet potatoes. He had already peeled and chopped them into uniform cubes, which now sat glistening in a bowl lightly coated in oil. "The seasoning," he announced, holding up 2 shakers, will be sodium chloride and ground piper nigrum. Salt and pepper, Shiala translated, her chemical knowledge kicking in. Relatively benign. Exactly. And for a touch of color and mild flavor, he produced a third shaker. Capsicum anum. Paprika. Low on the Scoville scale. Almost no heat. It's mostly for flavor. Shiala eyed the red powder with suspicion, but remained silent. She perched on the edge of the stool, watching as Nico spread the vegetables on a tray and slid them into his compact convention oven. Another piece of hidden contraband. Minutes later, he pulled the tray out, the room filled with a warm, earthy aroma. The tuber cubes grew tender, their edges browned and caramelized. He sprinkled them with a little more salt and offered the bowl to Shiala, along with a small two-pronged utensil. Go on, he encouraged. It's just food. For Shiala, and for most of the galaxy, food was nutrition, a balanced slurry of proteins, carbohydrates, and micronutrients designed for efficiency and minimal risk. She picked up a single tiny roasted tuber cube with the utensil. She examined it from all angles. She sniffed it cautiously. Finally, she placed it in her mouth. Nico watched her. He saw her initial hesitation, the first tentative chew, then her large liquid eye widened, reflecting the room's light. Her throat gave a single surprised trill. She chewed thoughtfully. After a long moment, she swallowed. The texture, she said, her voice soft. The exterior is firm while the interior yields becoming soft. And the taste, the flavor is complex. The mineral sharpness of the sodium chloride elevates the tuber's baseline sweetness. And the other compound, the nigrum, it has a woody, pungent quality. And the paprika adds a faint, smoky note underneath it all. Something new edged her voice as she analyzed it, breaking it down into chemical and textural components. She took another piece, a larger one, with more confidence. This is, she struggled for the right word, pleasurable. Nico grinned. And that's the whole point, Shiala. She looked at him, a piece of roasted Galian tuber impaled on her utensil, and in her perception, he transformed from a walking biohazard into a magician. The summons came via university communique. Mr. Nico Du Bois is to attend a meeting with Professor Orzo in his office at his earliest convenience. It read like a summons to the principal's office. Nico straightened his jumpsuit and presented himself at the designated time. The professor's office was a private laboratory filled with holographic botanical diagrams, humming analysis equipment, and catalog specimens suspended in glowing stasis fields. Professor Orzo hovered in the room's center, his metallic body emitting a low, intense hum. His chimes were a complex, scintillating harmony. Mr. Du Bois, thank you for coming. Orzo chimed, his tone eager. Please have a seat. Nico sat in the indicated chair. Orzo brought up holographic charts and graphs that floated in the air between them, covered in complex molecular diagrams. Since your lunchtime demonstration, the professor chimed, I have reevaluated my entire understanding of co-evolutionary diet. The data is transformative. He gestured to one chart. I have cross-referenced your species' physiological responses to capsaicin with a standard galactic model for pain receptor activation. The model is incomplete. It omits the secondary endorphin reaction and the subsequent psychological conditioning that leads to what you call an acquired taste. It is a biological paradox. Nico nodded. We just call it good food, Professor. Yes, indeed, Orzo chimed, his rings vibrating at a higher frequency. This is what I wish to discuss. I require more data. Your elemental knowledge, as Mrs. Shiala described it, is a resource I must embrace. I need you to describe in as much detail as you can the physiological and psychological effects of consuming other Terran toxins. For the next hour, Nico found himself giving an impromptu lecture to the galaxy's foremost xenobotanist. He described the sharp, sinus-clearing burn of wasabi and horseradish, explaining that the active compound, allyl isothiocyanate, was an entirely different class of chemical irritant from capsaicin. Orzel made rapid notes, his chimes a flurry of analytical tones as he muttered about TRPA one-channel agonist and volatile vapor-based delivery systems. He described the unique numbing tingle of Szechuan peppercorns, the mala sensation, a vibration on the tongue distinct from pain or heat. Orzel nearly hummed apart, bringing up nerve cell diagrams and theorizing about mechanoreceptor interference. He described the deep lingering heat of ghost peppers, the subtle differences in how the burn presented itself compared to the sharp stinging of a habanero. With each new description, Orzel's resonant hum grew more complex, shifting from a rapid series of arpeggios to a brilliant major chord. He was a scientist who had spent his life meticulously cataloging the locks on many doors, only to have someone walk up and show him that for one species, those locks were also keys. Incredible, Orzel chimed, his voice humming with discovery. This is about a complex symbiotic relationship between a species and its flora, a relationship based on neurological recontextualization. You endure the pain and cultivate an appreciation for it. You have turned your planet's chemical arsenal into a spice rack. He looked at Nico, his harmony softening to a warm, deep thrum. Mr. Du Bois, this is an entirely new field of study. We have been viewing Deathworld flora through the narrow lens of toxicology. You have shown me that we should have been looking at it through the lens of neurogastronomy, and perhaps, he added, his chimes thoughtful, gastronomy. Word of Nico's flavor experiments with Shiala, combined with the legend of the Lunchbox incident, spread through the student body. He received tentative messages from other students. A burly growlak, whose species normally subsisted on raw mineral supplements, asked if it was true that heat could change the nature of a foodstuff. A slender, multi-jointed being from a low-gravity world inquired about the concept of savory. Shiala had the idea. You should formalize this, she had said, her confidence growing daily. Create a club, an official venue for your culinary outreach. Bureaucracy made getting approval a struggle. Nico had to fill out dozens of forms citing safety protocols and particulate emission controls. The application stalled until Professor Orzel personally intervened, co-signing the proposal and framing it as a practical xenogastronomy research group. The university, swayed by the esteemed professor's endorsement, approved it. The Deathworld Delicacies Club held its first meeting in a small, underused common room kitchen that Orzel had secured for them. About a dozen students showed up, a mix of the brave, the curious, and the academically minded. Shiala attended, acting as his self-appointed lab assistant and safety officer. Nico also noticed a familiar face near the back, Cora, a student from the Advanced Culinary Sciences program. She was a Krillian, a species known for their artistry with smooth, pale skin and three-fingered hands. She observed the proceedings with a still expression, her thoughts hidden. For their first lesson, Nico chose something simple, garlic bread. All right, everyone, he announced, gesturing to the simple ingredients laid out on the counter. This is bread, a baked food product from a dough of flour and water. This is a fat-based emulsion, what we call butter. And this is, he said, holding up a head of garlic, is Ilium sativum, another Terran plant with a potent chemical defense. He explained how crushing the garlic cells initiated an enzymatic reaction, converting ilium to allicin, a sulfuric compound with antimicrobial properties and a powerful pungent aroma. The meeting turned into a delightful chaos. He showed them how to crush the garlic and mix it with the softened butter. They politely evacuated a gaseous being from Volon when the airborne allicin particles caused its internal pressures to fluctuate. A Petra named Rock, whose species cooked with geothermal energy, misinterpreted toasted and tried to caramelize his slice of bread at a high temperature, which turned it into a blackened diamond-hard briquette. But through the trial and error, something happened. The smell of garlic and melting butter filled the room, a warm, inviting, and utterly alien scent in the sterile Lyceum. When the bread came out of the heating unit, golden brown and fragrant, the group fell silent. Nico showed them how to take a piece. They nibbled hesitantly at first, then with growing enthusiasm. "The texture is stimulating," Rock rasped, scraping the surface with a hardened digit. "It melts upon the palate," Growlick rumbled, his gravelly voice full of surprise. By the end of the meeting, the tray was empty. They were a group of students from a dozen different worlds sharing a meal and laughing. The Deathworld Delicacies Club was a success. Cora, Nico noted, had slipped out sometime during the tasting, leaving her sample behind on the counter. "What do you miss most, Nico?" Shala asked one afternoon. They were in the university archives, a vast, silent space where data scrolled down shimmering holographic columns. The cooking club was a hit, but an ache for home crept back in. "Peach cobbler," he answered without hesitation. "My grandmother's." He described it to her. Sweet, juicy peaches, baked until they were soft and bubbling, the thick, syrupy sauce seasoned with cinnamon and nutmeg, the sweet biscuit-like dumplings dropped on top, golden brown and crisp on the outside, soft and fluffy on the inside. It was the taste of late summer in Georgia, of family gatherings and Sunday dinners of home. "I want to make it out for the annual culinary showcase," he confessed. The showcase was the Lyceum's biggest cultural event, a competition that drew chefs and food scientists from all over the Concord. "A noble goal," Shella trilled, "but there's a problem." "The peaches are the problem," Nico said with a sigh. "I know." He had spent days searching the galactic databases. The Concord had cataloged millions of plant species, but the databases yielded no equivalent to Prunus persica. Food synthesizers could create a pale chemical echo of the flavor, but the texture remained elusive. The yielding flesh, the slight fuzz of the skin, the juice running down your chin. These qualities were absent. The fruit's soul was missing. "Perhaps there is an analog," Sheila suggested, her studiousness taking over. "A fruit from another world with a similar sugar-to-acid ratio, a comparable pectin structure, and a stone fruit morphology." So they spent the afternoon in the Xenobotanical Archives, a pair of friends on a quest for a peach substitute. They sifted through endless files, cross-referencing Terran botany with the galactic database. They read about the pulpy spore sacs of Mycona, the sugar fruits of Atlantis, the gelatinous berry clusters of Hydros. Their search yielded only imperfect analogs. By the end of the day, their quest for a suitable space peach was fruitless. But as they worked side by side in the quiet hum of the archives, sharing a tablet and debating the merits of fibrous versus pulpy textures, Nico felt the ache in his chest recede. The shared effort, the quiet companionship, was a balm. The quest was, for the moment, as important as the destination. The Deathworld Delicacies Club was getting bolder. For their fourth meeting, Nico decided it was time to introduce them to proper heat. "Tonight," he announced to the now larger group, "we're making a mild coconut curry." He explained the concept of a curry, a complex dish of spices simmered in a liquid base. He showed them the coconut milk, a rich white liquid pressed from the flesh of another Terran fruit. He laid out the aromatic spices, turmeric for its earthy flavor and brilliant yellow color, coriander, cumin, ginger, and a small bowl of finely minced red chili. "This," he said, holding up one of the pods, "this is where we get the heat. We're going to use a minute amount." The process was more complex than garlic bread, a symphony of smells and textures. The members followed along, their initial hesitation giving way to focused excitement. The common room filled with the fragrant, exotic scent of toasted spices and simmering coconut milk. The final dish was a beautiful golden stew, served over a fluffy steamed grain analog. It was a hit. The combination of creamy, sweet, savory, and aromatic was a revelation to palates raised on monolithic ration slurry. The flavors, they evolve in the mouth. A willowy plant-based being, Vela, trilled, her leafy appendages quivering. It's both soothing and stimulating, Rock the Petron rumbled in agreement. The experiment had one complication. A small aquatic student from Gliese 581G named Flirp took one sip and his placid green skin flushed a panicked, vibrant magenta. A thin film of coolant vapor sublimated from his breathing spiracles, misting the air around him. Shala was at his side instantly, offering him a beaker of a pH-neutral cleansing solution. A standard thermoregulatory response to an irritant, she announced calmly. He is safe, merely surprised. Flirp, after flushing his system, recovered, though he eyed the curry with newfound respect. Nico realized then that adaptation had its limits. He was more than a cook, he was an ambassador, and he had a responsibility to his audience. A few weeks later, Professor Orzal summoned Nico to his private lab again. The professor's metallic form was vibrating, his chimes a brilliant major chord. "Nico, you must see this," he chimed, his voice loud. On a workbench inside a small open containment field sat a native Galian plant. It had broad, waxy leaves and a thick, fibrous stalk. "This is the Galian spine leaf," Orzal explained. "I classified it years ago. Its sap is a mild caustic irritant. Contact with mucosal tissue causes inflammation and discomfort. Standard procedure is to handle it with caution." Okay, Nico said, unsure where this was going. "Your description of the allicin reaction in garlic and the volatile compounds in horseradish, it gave me a new hypothesis," Orzal said, his chimes tumbling out in a rush. "I had analyzed the plant in its inert state, but what if the irritation was a defense mechanism activated by cellular damage?" He used a pair of remote manipulators to pick up a small metal pestle. "I need your culinary expertise, your elemental knowledge. Watch." He brought the pestle down and crushed a section of the stalk. A sharp, pungent odor, similar to wasabi, but with a cleaner, greener note, filled the air. "Smell that?" Orzal hummed. Nico sniffed. "Wow, yeah, it clears the sinuses." "Indeed!" Orzal gestured to a nearby monitor where data was streaming from a chemical analysis drone. "The cellular damage triggers an enzymatic chain reaction identical in principle to your garlic. It produces a new compound, one absent from the plant's inert state. And this new compound, look," he pointed to a section of data. "It has potent antimicrobial and antifungal properties, far more potent than any previously known organic preservative." Nico widened his eyes. "So you could use it to keep food from spoiling?" "Better than that," Orzal declared. "It functions at room temperature, bypassing the need for stasis fields or irradiation. This could revolutionize food transport and storage across the Concord. It's an economic game changer." He turned to Nico, his resonant harmony washing over the lab. "Your unique perspective made this discovery possible. I have already begun drafting the research paper. I am, of course, giving you full co-author credit." Nico stared, stunned. To be a credited author on a major scientific paper was an incredible honor. "Professor, I just told you how to make garlic bread." "On the contrary," Orzal chimed, his tone soft. "You taught me how to think like a chef. You told me to stop asking what a plant does to you and start asking what you can do to a plant. It is the most significant intellectual leap of my career." The official announcement for the annual Symposium on Applied Molecular Gastronomy, the university's formal name for its culinary showcase, went up on all the public data screens. It was the Lyceum's primary scientific competition, where judges assessed chefs on novel chemical interactions. A luminous advertisement showed elegant dishes assembled by lasers and robotic arms, culminating in a shot of the previous winner, Cora. Her creation was a cube of nutrient gel containing suspended spheres of contrasting flavors that exploded on the tongue. The dish was beautiful, sterile, and cold. Nico looked at it and felt his stomach tighten. His rustic cooking felt outmatched by that kind of high-tech gastronomy. He was a cook. They were food scientists. He was explaining his frustrations to Shiala in their usual study spot in the archives when she cut him off. "You're being illogical, Nico," she said, her tone firm. She stood straight, her trills gone, her posture steady. "Cora's cooking is technically brilliant. It's an artifice. It's a demonstration of control over ingredients." She leaned forward, the filaments around her eyes sharp with focus. "What you do is different. Your cooking is about invitation, where hers is about control. You invite the ingredients to become something more than the sum of their parts. You have taught a dozen students from a dozen worlds to experience joy from eating. That is more revolutionary than flavor spheres in a gel cube." Her words stunned him. "You have to enter," she insisted. "You must show them. Even if I wanted to, the time required exceeds what I can manage alone," he argued. "And I still need a substitute for Peaches." "Then I will assist you," she said. "I will be your sous chef." Nico stared at her. For a Kess whose traditions around food preparation were intensely solitary and ritualistic, this was a significant offer. "Shiala," he started, unsure what to say. "We will do it together," she finished, her voice leaving no room for argument. He looked up at his friend, her downy feathers smooth and settled, her determined eye, her delicate manipulators held steady. He thought of the timid student who was afraid to stand near him. "Okay, Shiala, let's go win a cooking competition." Days before the showcase, Shiala arrived at Nico's dorm, her upper limbs cradling a small mesh bag. She presented it to him, the feathers on her neck smoothed down in a gesture of pride. The bag held a half-dozen small, fuzzy orange fruits. They were roundish with a slight cleft down one side, and they had a heavenly scent, a bright, sweet-tart aroma that was remarkably close to a ripe peach. "What are these?" Nico breathed, picking one up. It was warm. "Galian sunblush fruit," Shiala announced. "My research paid off. They only grow on the southern continent, and their harvest season is 1 week long. According to my analysis of its fructose, sucrose, and citric acid levels, it's the closest botanical analog to your Prunus persica in the entire sector." Nico cut one open. The flesh was a vibrant, sunny orange, and a single hard pit rested in the center. He sliced off a piece and tasted it. The flavor was distinct from a peach, a little more tart, with a faint floral afternote that eluded him. But the texture was perfect, juicy, soft, and sublime. "Shiala, you're a genius," he said. "I'm aware," she trilled, a hint of playful pride in her voice. The next 2 days were a blur of work. Nico's dorm room transformed into a test kitchen. Bowls and utensils covered every surface. The air was thick with the smells of baking fruit, toasted spices, and bubbling sugar. They worked side by side. Shiala, with her 4 deft manipulators, prepped ingredients and measured spices with exacting care. Nico, with his hands-on approach, focused on tasting, adjusting, and bringing the dish together. They talked as they worked. He told her more about his grandmother, how she cooked by feel and memory. Shiala spoke of her own family, the pressure to uphold the strict traditions of her clan, and her secret fear that she would fail so far from home. "You're succeeding, Shiala," Nico told her, stirring a pot of glazing sauce. "You're building something new." By the end of the second day, they had it, the final dish. A fusion of earth and gall, a creation that represented both of their journeys. They would make spicy glazed sunblush fruit, served over a savory medley of Terran and Galian grains, with a complex, balanced chili cinnamon spice blend. Home and here, all in one bowl. The showcase arena was a vast, shining hall. Banks of light shone down on 20 identical state-of-the-art cooking stations. Each was a sterile stainless steel marvel of induction cooktops, sonic whisk, and flash-freezing units. Nico and Shiala's station stood out. Alongside the high-tech equipment, they had arranged their own tools, a well-worn cutting board, a carbon steel skillet, and simple bowls of freshly chopped ingredients. It looked archaic next to the others. During the pre-competition briefing, Cora approached their station. The Krillian chef stepped without a sound. She examined their setup, her gaze taking in every detail. Quite, she said, her voice smooth. She picked up a sun-blushed fruit, turning it over in her three-fingered hand. To rely on such imprecise biological materials. Bold. We like the challenge, Nico replied evenly. Indeed, Cora said, the corner of her mouth twitching. My entry this year deconstructs the concept of a fruit entirely. I have isolated the key flavor compounds of the Krillian nectarpod and suspended them in a self-arranging protein structure. It provides the full sensory experience while avoiding the messy unpredictability of cellulose and water. She placed the fruit back down. There is a certain charm to archaic techniques, I suppose. Good luck. She walked away, her posture rigid.
Competitors, your time begins now!
The announcer's voice echoed through the hall, and the showcase exploded into activity. The air filled with the hum of advanced technology. At Cora's station, she operated micro-syringes and magnetic stirrers, her motions a blur. Lasers sliced nutrient gels into exact shapes. Nico and Shiala's station was an island of focused energy. The first thing Nico did was get his skillet on the heat. The sizzle of oil hitting the hot pan cut through the electronic hums, a warm, organic sound. The rich smell of toasting grains and spices rose from their station, a stark contrast to the sterile air around the others. Shiala was calm. Her two lower limbs kept her balance, while her four upper manipulators moved with fluid speed. Two hands held a vegetable steady, while the other two performed a perfect rapid dice. She was his partner. Halfway through the competition, Nico looked up and scanned the audience in the observation gallery above. The members of the Deathworld Delicacies Club were there, holding a crudely made sign that read, Go Nico, go Shiala, go Flavor. Rock, Vela, and even Flurb stood among them, waving. Professor Orzo hovered alone near them, his metallic form emitting a steady, supportive hum. Sensing Nico's gaze, one of his rings produced a single clear, resonant chime that cut through the noise, a private note of encouragement. Nico turned back to his station, his focus sharpened.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1! Utensils down!
With seconds to spare, they placed the final sprig of a giggling herb on their last plate. They had done it. Their dish was a swirl of color. The vibrant orange of the glazed fruit contrasted with the earthy tones of the grain medley. The glossy sheen of the sauce caught the light. A few stations down, Cora's creation was a clear cube containing a delicate, suspended structure of shimmering blue and silver. The multi-species panel of judges made their way down the line. Nico recognized the head judge, a food critic named Gorman Hesioid, a massive furred being whose opinions could make or break a career. When they arrived at his station, Nico took a deep breath. He presented the plates to the three judges. Knowing their biology, he and Shiala made subtle adjustments to each one. For the avian judge, he used a slightly spicier glaze. For the carapace judge, who tasted through sensitive pads on his feet, he had toasted some of the grains a little longer for extra crunch. Judges, Nico said, this is spicy glazed sunblush with a multigrain medley. Where I come from, food is more than fuel. It's memory, it's community, it's warmth, both literal and emotional. He gestured to the chili flake visible in the glaze. That's warmth, the spice, on my world. We learn that some things that feel dangerous can also make you feel alive. This dish is an invitation. It's a taste of my home, a taste of gall, and a taste of the friendship that made it possible. The judges tasted Cora's dish first. They chewed, then made notes on their tablets. They praised its technical brilliance, its intellectual purity, its execution. A triumph of culinary science, Hesiod declared, his deep voice carrying. Cora gave a small, perfect bow. Then they turned to Nico's dish. They paused, inhaling the warm, complex aroma. Hesiod, the furred critic, took a large spoonful. He chewed, his eyes closed. The avian judge pecked delicately at his portion. The carapace judge placed one of its feet onto its plate, its antennae twitching. The seconds ticked by. Nico held his breath. Shiala stood beside him, still. Then Hesiod's eyes opened. Astonishing, he rumbled. He took another bite. The sweetness of the fruit, the savory depth of the grains, and the warmth. He looked directly at Nico. It is a bloom rather than an assault, a pleasant, lingering warmth that complements the other flavors. The avian judge chirped in agreement, praising the layered complexity. The carapace judge tapped its foot again. The textural contrast is profound. A journey in every bite. The judges conferred. Hesiod stepped forward to the podium. The hall quieted. The technical mastery of Chef Cora's entry is flawless. It is a triumph of culinary science, a dish designed for intellect, he announced. The crowd applauded politely. Cora looked confident. However, Hesiod continued, his voice rising, great cooking is about more than the head. It is about the heart. Today, one dish did more than impress us. It nourished us. It told us a story. It gave us home, even a home new to us. For creating a dish with skill and soul. The winner of this year's Lyceum Culinary Showcase is Nico Dubois and Shyla of the Spun Filaments. The hall exploded with sound. Shiala's manipulator gripped Nico's arm, her body trembling as she let out a series of loud, joyous trills. The members of the Deathworld Delicacies Club cheered wildly in the gallery. Through the cheering crowd, Cora approached. She stopped in front of him, her expression shifting from its usual clinical stillness to one of respect. She gave him a slow, deliberate nod. They held the after-party in Xenobotany Lab 4. Professor Orzal had, with pride, officially sanctioned it for ongoing culinary research. The sterile lab filled with the warm, spicy, sweet smell of the prize-winning food. The cooking club, Professor Orzal, Shiala, and Nico gathered around a lab bench, eating from disposable sample trays and laughing. The tomato plant, the beautiful lethal plant from the first day, sat in its terrarium, a silent witness to the celebration. I must confess, Professor Orzal chimed, his harmony a bright, joyous sound. My intellectual curiosity has now reached a critical threshold. He used a small utensil to pick up a tiny piece of a glazed sunblush fruit. It had a minuscule speck of chili on it. He regarded it for a moment, then placed it in his nutrient intake orifice. His metallic rings chimed in a rapid, chaotic sequence, dissonant and sharp, then questioning and curious, before resolving into a deep, brilliant harmony he now knew meant pleasure. He processed the new data for a long moment. Analytically fascinating, he declared. Nico laughed, a deep, happy sound. He looked around the lab at the strange and wonderful beings he now called his friends. Shiala animatedly described the Maillard reaction to rock. Vela and Flurp carefully tried a piece of the sunblush, Flurp's skin remaining a calm, happy green. Professor Orzal contemplated a second bite of a Terran chemical weapon. He was thousands of light years from Georgia, on a station orbiting an alien world. The air was still and dry, a universe away from the cicada song and humidity of a summer night. But the warmth of shared food and the easy laughter of good friends filled the room. In sharing a piece of his home, he had built a new one.